And good afternoon to everyone who's tuning in to TV Courtroom, hosted by yours truly, attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael Lex, aka the angriest black man in America. And those of you who might not be familiar with me saying during the intro that I'm the angriest black man in America, let me just explain what that means before we get into one and a half topics today. I say one and a half because one is critically important. Actually, to be quite honest, both are critically important. But one I want to focus on today and touch on the other one. So that's why I say one and a half topics. The one is clearly what's going on in connection with Chinatown and 76th Place. That's going to be the focus of today's show. And assuming we have a couple minutes at the end, I want to talk about the third party candidates who could get Orange Hitler, Mango Mussolini reelected. And I say reelected not as the current president and next president, but the prior president, and then potentially the new president. And what I mean by that, and I just want to touch on it now before we get to the quote unquote star of the show, which is 76th Place. One of the greatest scholars in American history is none other than Dr. Cornel West. And because he's arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, he probably is arrogant in that greatness. And that greatness, that arrogance could result in America turning into Germany before Hitler, could result in Italy, or I should say America, turning into Italy before Mussolini. His arrogance and greatness could turn America into Spain before Francisco Franco. You might say, Mike, Hitler and Germany and Mussolini and Italy and Francisco Franco in Spain, isn't that hyperbole? No, it's not hyperbole. But if Dr. Cornel West continues what he's doing, he can make that happen. Is he intending to make that happen? No, he's not. Is it his goal to make that happen? No, it's not. He's clearly well-intentioned. But you all remember the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's why I say Dr. Cornel West is a great man, and with greatness comes arrogance. I mean, if you're the best, you want people to know you're the best. But simply because you're a great academic, a great scholar, a great professor, a great author, doesn't make you a practical, pragmatic, political scientist. I want to talk more about my beloved brother, Dr. Cornel West, and his road to hell, or better stated, America's road to hell. And you might say, but why are you coming down so hard on Cornel West? It's because I love him so much. That's why. He ought to know better. He's going to wind up doing to America what Ralph Nader did to America. Remember Bush and Gore? Same kind of thing. We'll talk more about that later. I told you we have one and a half topics. That's the half, because I don't have a whole lot of time to talk about that. I want to really get into 76th Place. So those out there who are tuning in, I encourage you to get a pen or to get a pad or get your iPhone or your iPad or whatever device you have and just jot some stuff down, because this is critically important. The first thing I want to share with you in connection with 76th Place in Chinatown is this. I wrote an article in the Philadelphia Tribune. It was published a couple weeks ago. I don't have enough time to go through that entire article right here, right now. So I encourage you to go to phillytrib.com. That's phillytrib.com. Our producer / engineer extraordinaire, Roland, put that up on the screen. Go to phillytrib.com, type in CORD, COARD, and type in 76th Place. Type in CORD, COARD, and type in 76th Place, and the article will come up. Having said that, let me reference pertinent, highlighted portions of that article. The article is entitled Billionaires, race baiters tried to undermine unity among Black and Asian opponents of 76th place. Let me repeat that. Billionaires, comma, race baiters tried to undermine unity among Black and Asian opponents of 76th place. As you can probably tell, I'm not Asian, but I don't have to be Asian to fight for the oppressed against the oppressor. If you know anything about American history, what happened after 1865? That's with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, December 6, 1865. So Black people kind of sort of got their freedom after 246 years of enslavement from August 25, 1619 until December 6, 1865. And with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, we kind of sort of got our freedom. I say kind of sort of because, you know, there's some small print you got to read in the 13th Amendment that exposes the flaws of the 13th Amendment. But we're not here to talk about that. We just want to say, okay, 13th Amendment, emancipation, Black folk get their freedom. But it wasn't all happiness after that, because once Black people kind of sort of got their freedom in 1865, the billionaire class, the upper class, began to pit the formerly enslaved Black people against the poor working class white people. And sadly, most of the working class white people fell for the okie doke. And instead of those poor, struggling, many poverty-stricken white laborers rising up against the white billionaire class, the white oppressor class, those poor white people began to attack the Black people who had just gotten their freedom, Black people who wanted a job. So instead of those white people looking at years and decades and literally centuries of being oppressed by rich white men, they turned their rage, their focus on Black people. Well, the billionaire class then fomented that antagonism before the races. Now, technically, there's no such thing as race because race is a social construct. So I basically mean ethnicity, but let's use race for purposes of this discussion. So the white billionaire class decided to pit poor, working class, white laborers against recently enslaved Black people who wanted a job. That's the same kind of thing, but obviously not as extreme, that's going on with the billionaire class and race baiters. And I'm embarrassed to say many of them are Black race baiters who are attacking Asian people. Instead of attacking the capitalist system that makes most of us poor, that makes the vast majority on this planet poor, I got to give the billionaire 1% class, I got to give them credit because they're evil geniuses. They know how to play that whole thing of divide and conquer. And that same playbook, or at least a few pages from that playbook, is being used in connection with 76th place. So having said that, and I'm watching the clock closely because I want to make sure I get everything in. Having said that, let me just skim through the pertinent highlighted portions of my article. But I encourage you all, please get a copy of the Philadelphia Tribune. You don't have to subscribe to it, although I encourage you to do it. Go to phillytrib.com, type in CORD, C-O-A-R-D, and type in 76th place, and the article will come up. By the way, before I jump into this, at the beginning of the show, I said I am attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest Black man in America. And if you all know anything about, I would say, the greatest philosopher, writer in American history, the great James Baldwin, he's basically said this, and I'm paraphrasing: to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. To be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And now that I'm doing this show today regarding 76th place, let me amend that to say to be poor and conscious, to be working class and conscious, to be a laborer and be conscious is to be in a constant state of rage. Because if you're Black, you know about racism and slavery and sharecropping and convict leasing and Jim Crow and redlining and gerrymandering and mass incarceration. You know all that. So you're going to be angry, and you better be angry, but it can't be a destructive anger. It has to be a productive anger, a constructive anger. Get a good education, organize the masses, and rise up together in a non-violent type of way. So I started out by saying my mantra, my presentation, my introduction, Attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael Lex, aka the angriest Black man in America. I talk about that anger because I'm Black and I know what America has done to Black people. So of course I'm going to be angry. Well, if you're white and poor, if you're brown and poor, if you're yellow and poor, and your parents were, and your grandparents were, and your great grandparents were, you, and maybe might not even be poor in terms of poverty stricken, but you gotta work every day to eat every day. That's struggling. While the person on top rarely works, exploits the masses, and gets the masses to engage in this divide and conquer kind of thing. And the billionaires run away with more millions and more billions. So not only was James Baldwin right when he said to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage, but to be a member of the working class and to be conscious is in a constant state of rage. You might say, well, that sounds like socialism. That's not a good thing. Socialism, that's communism. We love capitalism. Well, you love capitalism because you don't know what it is. Let me tell you for a second what capitalism is. And here's the best example. Slavery is the perfect form of capitalism. Why? Because capitalism is to exploit labor and maximize profit. Exploit labor and maximize profit. And the capitalists, they are just like the billionaires, same thing actually, are evil geniuses because they make poor people think that it's great to aspire to become a millionaire. Believe me, you ain't never going to become a millionaire. They make you aspire to become a billionaire. They throw out names like Jay-Z and Michael Jordan and Oprah Winfrey. That's bullshit. Pardon my language, but it's complete bullshit because those are the rare exceptions. The average people on this planet, the average people in America are poor and struggling. They'll never be millionaires and certainly can't even conceive of being billionaires. But the system, the capitalist system is designed to make you think if you work hard, you'll get it. No. The only way you'll get it is if your mother or father were millionaires or mother and father were billionaires. There are exceptions. People can struggle and win, but that's the rare exception. So when we talk about what I'm talking about, and people accusing me of being a socialist, I wear that on my sleeve. I'm a proud socialist. You know who else was a socialist? I'm not a Christian, but Jesus was a socialist. You know who else was a socialist? Dr. King. I'm not into the whole thing that he was in with the nonviolence, but these great men and certainly great women throughout history, if they care about their fellow citizens, if they care about their sisters and their brothers and their family and their community, and they struggle to make sure that everybody gets treated equally or equitably, if they're concerned about the social status of their neighbors, if they want to make sure that the hungry are fed, if they want to make sure that the naked are clothed, if they want to make sure that the homeless are housed, they're socialists. America would have you believe that socialism is a thing where Big Brother comes in and throws everybody into a labor camp and they have to honor the great leader like they do in North Korea. That's not socialism. That's not even communism. I'm not getting into communism right now. That's a whole other story. I'm talking about democratic socialism. I'm talking about being concerned about the welfare of your brother and sister and other. You know, every time I speak publicly, every time I'm on a panel discussion, every time I'm doing a TV show like TV Courtroom or Radio Courtroom, the show that I do every Saturday at WURD 96.1 FM, every time I do a public presentation, I always make sure that I explain precisely what I'm talking about. And if you look over my right shoulder, you'll see Malcolm X. Malcolm X to me is the greatest man in world history. One of the reasons why is because he was never completely content with where he was. Every time he did something, whatever label, whatever level, he was great at that. So if he was a criminal, and he was a pimp and a gambling hustler, he was great at that. When he went to prison, he was a great inmate because he struggled to improve himself. When he got out of prison, he became a member of the Nation of Islam. Then he moved on to Orthodox Islam. My point is, he never stopped growing. We don't know what Malcolm would be right now because every time he was introduced to better, what he conceived as better information, he embraced that. He wasn't stubborn. He was locked into his criminal thing until he found something better. He was locked into his inmate thing until he found something better. Every time he found something, he was adamant about that thing, but he was open-minded to the point of, hey, I'm adamant about this thing, but I don't know everything about this thing. So let me find out more information. So he continually continually grew. And that's how I try to be. But let's get back to the point of socialism. So when you hear people throw out socialism like it's a slur, they have no idea what socialism is. Socialism is simply wanting for others what you want for yourself. You want a nice car, you want the same thing for your neighbors. You want a nice house, you want the same thing for your neighbors. You want good food, you want the same thing for your neighbors. That's all socialism is. So those of you who have you believe that it's something innately evil, they're just brainwashing you. Why? Because it comes from the media. It comes from the schools. It comes from the system. So the system is not going to give you information you need to overthrow it. Of course not. It's going to make you believe you can be Jay-Z, make you believe you can be Oprah Winfrey, make you believe you can be Bill Gates or the rest of those folks. And think about it. Why would you want to be? And believe me, folks, I'm looking at the clock. It's 3:47. I'm going to get to 76th place, but I want to lay the foundation. I want to put it in context. You know, it's interesting when you look at millionaires and multimillionaires and billionaires. I saw a post on social media one day that was so profound. Most stuff on social media is stupid, but every now and then you get something intelligent. And the post said that if we as humans were able to put a camera in the jungle and we were able to follow a family or community of gorillas, of monkeys, and as we watched this community of monkeys, we noticed that some of those monkeys in that community would get not only one banana and bring it back to wherever it was living, but that same monkey would get 2 bananas and bring them back, and then 4 bananas and bring them back, and 8 and 20 and 100. And at the end of the year, that monkey got 1,000,000 bananas. What the hell does that monkey need 1,000,000 bananas for? What the hell does that monkey need 1,000,000,000 bananas for? The monkey can't eat 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000. At the same time, there are other monkeys out there who are starving. It makes more sense to share stuff, especially stuff you don't even need. I draw that monkey and banana analogy to human beings. Why the hell do you need $1,000,000? Why the hell would you even consider needing $1,000,000,000? You don't need that. That's innate greed. That's capitalism. Because like I said, the definition of capitalism is the exploitation of labor and the maximization of profit. Exploitation of labor, make people work with limited pay. Maximizing profits, if you made 1,000,000 last year, you got to make 1,000,001 the next year, and 1,000,002 the next year, and 1,000,003 the next year. You have to maximize profits. But with socialism, democratic socialism, it's about looking at what people need and providing for their needs. To whom, according to his needs, from whom, according to their ability. It's as simple as that. That's the foundation. Those billionaire owners of what they're calling 76th place don't give a damn about you. And then we get to, and I'm going to touch on this later, well, there are certain Black people who are talking about the jobs they get. There's certain Black ministers that are talking about members in their congregation need work. But damn it, that's the same thing that white racist ministers and white union leaders said when black folks got out of slavery and were looking for work. Those white ministers said, we can't give those N-words jobs because we need jobs. I want to talk more about that later. Let me now get into the article. I'm looking at the clock. It's 3:50. We got about, 45 minutes left. So I'm going to get all this in. And plus, I'm going to talk about my beloved brother, Dr. Cornel West, and how he is a good man and he is well-intentioned, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I know you all got your pens out. I know you all got your pads out. So let class begin. Again, get the article, Philadelphia Tribune, phillytrib.com, type in CORD, C-O-A-R-D, type in 76 place. Having said that, the article is entitled, Billionaires and Race Baiters Try to Undermine Unity Among Black and Asian Opponents of 76 place. And I start out by writing in the article, quote, in 2022, the Sixers organization publicly announced plans to create an exclusively privately funded 18,500 seat sports/concert arena with ground floor retail shops called 76 Place at Market Street in downtown Philly. But three problems quickly arose. Problem number one, and I'm going to read this quote because I actually like it. It's pretty witty. Thank you very much. It goes like this. First, the Sixers soon afterward ran a reverse layup play, and in the process committed an offensive foul against Philly residents by changing course and stating that the arena would no longer be privately funded. Instead, it would, in large part, be funded by city and state taxpayer dollars. Recently, there's rumors or statements that they changed that and decided that it wouldn't involve taxpayer dollars. But whether it does or does not, you all still should oppose it. I'm going to explain that in reason number 2 and reason number 3. But reason number 1, I pointed out that they said, okay, this is going to be something for the city. It's going to be privately funded and we're going to cover all the expenses. Then they said, now we change your mind. Now it's questionable. But that's number 1. Number 2, let me read that verbatim. Second, the arena's initial cost, which was $1.3 billion, ballooned by $25 million to $1.55 billion to include a swanky 20-story residential tower with 400 units. You think the folks from the hood in North Philly are going to be able to afford to live there? The folks from the hood in South Philly and Germantown and East Oak Lane and wherever will be able to afford to live there? Not at all. That's number 2. And number 3, let me read that verbatim. Third, plans for the arena's construction near the center of Chinatown on Market Street between 10th and 11th Streets would move forward despite, and for me, this is critically important, despite the strong opposition of almost all Asian American leaders, almost all Asian American residents, almost all Asian American groups, and almost all Asian American businesses in Chinatown. In fact, thousands, and I do mean thousands, of Asian and non-Asian protesters attended an anti-arena rally outside City Hall on September 7th. And a few days later, at a public hearing on September 11th inside City Hall, the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation, through its spokesperson, Margaret Shin, stated, quote, "We vote no on 76th Place. Our community has spoken." So those are my 3 reasons. But in regards to that 3rd reason, that resounds with me because I was born in North Philly. I was born in North Philly near 20th and York. And we really didn't have any really important stuff there. But a few blocks away going north toward Lehigh, we had Connie Mack Based Recreation Center. And Connie Mack Recreation Center near 22nd and Lehigh, I played Little League Baseball there from age 8 up until 19. I have some wonderful memories about that park. In fact, we even won city champions. We were a dynasty, but I digress. My point is, I have memories of Connie Mack, even though I found out when I became an adult that Connie Mack was an effing racist. So it shouldn't have been called the Connie Mack Recreation Center, but that's a whole nother place. that's a whole nother discussion regarding that place. We want to stick with 76 place. My point is, growing up in that community in North Philly and remembering those great old days about playing baseball at Connie Mack Recreation Center means so much to me. Unfortunately, because Black folks are at the bottom of the racial ethnic totem pole, where the system comes down hardest on us, it wouldn't allow us to have an Africa town in North Philly. But my Asian brothers and sisters were able to have a Chinatown downtown. And that's a wonderful thing. So in the same way that I would not have liked it and still would not if 76th Place was moved to 22nd Lehigh, because I have a connection to that recreation center when I was a kid playing baseball. In fact, had a tryout with the Reading Phillies, but got cut. That's a whole another story. And I realized that being a great baseball player in your neighborhood does not mean you're a great player nationwide. Got cut, decided to go to college, then the law school, so the rest of it says history. My point is, I got those great memories about that. And those memories would be even greater if we had an Africa town in North Philly. We could go to supermarkets, we could go to travel agencies, we could go to restaurants and shoe shops and all those kind of things right there in the hood. We didn't have that because of America's systemic racism, which comes down hardest on Black people. But my Asian brothers and sisters do have that. So if I wouldn't want white supremacy to construct a Black Africa town, why the hell will I support white supremacy crushing Chinatown? And by the way, people need to understand that just like Africa is not a country, Africa is a continent with about 50 different countries in that continent. When we talk about Chinatown, not all the Asians in Chinatown are Chinese. You have Japanese, you have Korean, you have Vietnamese. I respect and love the way my Asian brothers and sisters came together and basically said, we don't care whether you call it Chinatown or Japantown or Koreatown. We just have our yellow brothers and sisters doing our thing to support one another. Every time I leave court, and I'm an attorney, so I'm either coming from the Criminal Justice Center at 13th and Filbert or from federal court near 7th and Market, and I go past that area that we call Chinatown, I'm not Chinese, I'm not Asian, but I applaud them because I'm looking around like, wow, Asian owned and operated banks, Asian owned and operated restaurants, Asian owned and operated supermarkets, travel agencies. And I'm like, y'all got that. Kudos, bravo. But what happens is that this system of white supremacy, a system that came about when violent thugs with guns came to the land we call America, but our red brothers and sisters call it Turtle Island. And because our red brothers and sisters didn't have the firepower to resist, white supremacy crushed it. And that's the MO, the modus operandi of white supremacy. It crushes everything, whether it is what I would hope to have been Africa Town in North Philly. They didn't have a chance to crush that because they wouldn't even allow it to come into existence. But my Asian brothers and sisters were able to put together Chinatown. And it's always about looking at who the enemy is. The enemy is not our Asian brothers and sisters. The enemy is white supremacy that is trying to crush Chinatown and wouldn't even allow an Africa Town to come into existence. So I'm always siding with the oppressed. I'm never siding with the oppressor. And if you support 76th Place, whether you intend to or not, you're supporting the oppressor. Those same Black people who are talking about, oh yeah, we're gonna get some jobs. The same ministers who might get some grants from 76th Place or whatever. I don't know what they're getting, but I'm sure they're getting something. Those same people, and I don't want to be too graphic, but I can say this on the station. If those same Black people were on fire, those white billionaires wouldn't even piss on them because they haven't done it since 1619. So why should they start now? But what they will do is throw some crumbs out to us and pit our Asian brothers and sisters against us and pit us against them. Let me continue. And this is a perfect segue into the point I was just making. Let me skip a couple paragraphs of the article and then go into the next part. Unfortunately, many supporters of the arena are selfishly focused on jobs and money for themselves instead of collectively focusing on community and culture for everyone. And even more unfortunate is that many of those arena supporters are Black laborers and Black church leaders. I know because I constantly have my ear close to the Black community in my roles as a Black radio talk show host, Black local cable show host, Black newspaper columnist, Black activist, and Black social media enthusiast. So I'm hearing and feeling and seeing Black people, and I'm not liking what I'm hearing and seeing in the Black leadership, in the Black laborers, in the Black ministers. And then I go on to write the following, consistent with what I just shared with you, quote, I say, unfortunately, because we Black folks and indigenous red folks who were on this land first know better than anyone else in this country the horror of losing one's homeland and one's culture to heartless capitalism and blatant racism. Instead of promoting the interest of white billionaire CEOs and white billionaire real estate developers, we Black folks should be standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity with our Asian American sisters and brothers in Chinatown. Now, I got to be fair. I did put on blast, without naming any names, Black ministers who are rallying around this promotion of white supremacy, because that's exactly what it is. But not all Black ministers are into that. There are some Black ministers, and I have to admit, I'm not into the whole Christian thing, but to the extent that I know what I know about the man that America calls Jesus, when I look at people who claim to be Christians, I always evaluate them by asking this question. What was Jesus? What would Jesus do? That's got to be the question. I'm not a Christian, but those of you who claim to be Christian and you live your life the way you do, you ought to wake up every morning and say, what would Jesus do? In this case, would Jesus side with the greedy billionaire real estate developers? Would Jesus side with the greedy billionaire CEOs? We don't have to even ask that question. We know what Jesus did with turning over the money tables from the money changers. We know that. Having said that, that's why I say we ought to be standing shoulder to shoulder. And even though, as I said, I put on blast some Black ministers, not all of them are like that. Some Black ministers get up every day and ask themselves, what would Jesus do? And then they do whatever Jesus would do. A good example is Reverend Dr. Gregory Edwards, a Black man who serves as interim director of Power Interfaith. And he gets it. He lives the what would Jesus do life. He clearly understands the importance of unity in the battle against racism and classism. That's why when I interviewed him for this article, here's what he said, quote, factually, a majority of people across lines of race do not support 76th place. And that majority is 69% throughout the city. That's almost 70% that oppose 76th place. The Honorable Reverend Dr. Gregory Edwards continues by saying, this is not simply about Chinatown for us. I love the fact that he makes that point. Let me repeat that. This is not simply about Chinatown for us. This is about developers that have already gentrified Black communities. And it's also about a city being willing to let billionaires build wherever they want at the expense of the people, which is why we need a broad, multiracial coalition. Reverend Dr. Gregory Edwards, you're about to make me convert to Christianity. Well, maybe not, but you're making me listen because you're making a whole bunch of sense. And I was so relieved when I heard about Reverend Dr. Gregory Edwards. I was so relieved when I spoke to him and realized that he's not like those ministers who might be in it for the money. I don't want to accuse them of being only focusing on money. But again, if they're lined up with these billionaires who Reverend Dr. Gregory Edwards talked about consist of people who have already gentrified much of Black neighborhoods. The same people, the same white supremacist people who have already gentrified Black communities in Philadelphia and across the country are the same people trying to do it to the Asian community regarding 76th place in Chinatown. and you black ministers, you black labor leaders are lining yourself up with them? Come on, man. Anyway, I'll continue. Speaking of gentrification, even one of the community impact reports financed by the Sixers organization itself surprisingly conceded that the arena could indirectly displace residents by expediting, quote, gentrification and loss of cultural identity in Chinatown. I'm going to repeat that because that's so important. There's a community impact report that was financed and prepared by the Sixers organization itself. And it surprisingly admitted, conceded, that the arena could indirectly displace residents by expediting, quote, gentrification and loss of cultural identity in Chinatown. All those Asian little boys and girls who look up to their Asian grandmom and grandpop and great-grandmom and great-grandpop, who could tell them stories about what they did in that community. But if 76th Place gets its way, those little Asian boys and those little Asian girls won't be able to have the type of culturally profound experience that their great-grandparents had there, that their grandparents had there, that their parents even had there, because of greedy, gentrifying, development, billionaire, white supremacists. That's why the Black community and the Asian community have to come together. But this is nothing new. My call for Asians and Blacks to come together is nothing new. You want proof? Here's proof. Here's part of my article. And again, I'm skipping a number of paragraphs, but you need to read that article. Go to phillytrib.com. That's phillytrib.com. Type in CORD, C-O-A-R-D. Thank you, producer, engineer extraordinaire, Roland. Type in COARD, type in 76th Place, and the article will be yours to have for free. You don't have to pay for it, but you do have to pay attention about it. Let me read this part about Blacks and Asians coming together. My call for Black and Asian unity is nothing new. As documented in a historically enlightening August 22, 2023 article by a veteran journalist and Harvard University professor by the name of Joseph Williams, here's what the great professor said, quote, Black-Asian solidarity is not new. Frederick Douglass argued against the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. A Black man, Frederick Douglass, aligned himself with Asians to oppose that. Political activist Yuri Kochiyama was an ally and friend of Malcolm X. In fact, Yuri was such a tight friend of Malcolm X. Malcolm X and other Black revolutionaries called her Sister Yuri. And Jesse Jackson stepped away from his presidential campaign in 1992 to protest the murder of Vincent Chin. So my call for Black and Asian unity is nothing new. You have people like Frederick Douglass who called for it, people like Malcolm X who called for it, people like Jesse Jackson who called for it. Then I go on to include something that's uncomfortable but necessary. Here's what I write. As an aside, I would be remiss and disingenuous if I failed to mention that not all Asians respect or even acknowledge what the Black community historically has done for them. Some of those Asians even promote white supremacy, such as the Asian organization that weirdly calls itself, quote, Students for Fair Admission, unquote. That's the group that filed the lawsuit in the US Supreme Court that last year, 2023, basically ended affirmative action for Black college students in America. So these Asian students came along and said, hey, you got these affirmative action programs in America, and they have these setups for Black students. And by them having these set up for Black students, we Asians, we don't get a fair shot. And there were Asians who took that position. But that was the minority view. Every group, every racial group, every ethnic group got woke people and maliciously sleep folks. No doubt about it. You got bad people who are Asian. You got bad people who are African. But I'd venture to say that the majority of each group have their head on straight. And speaking of Asians, during the Vietnam War, you know, Ho Chi Minh would have helicopters drop not bombs on the Black American soldiers, but leaflets and pamphlets. And those leaflets and pamphlets from Ho Chi Minh during the Vietnam War, they said, "Hey, Black soldier, why are you fighting for your own enemy? Before you came to my land to shoot me with American rifles and drop American bombs on me, you were oppressing America since 1619. And once you leave this war in Vietnam and go back home, they're not going to give you an education. They're not going to give you a job. They're not going to give you health care. So why are you fighting for the same enemy that's oppressing us both?" By the way, as an aside, you all need to listen to a song by one of the greatest rap groups in rap history. And you might say, well, how they rap? They were 1960. A group called The Last Poets. And they were the grandfathers of hip hop, but that whole spoken word thing. Google The Last Poets and Google a song called Ho Chi Minh. It's powerful in terms of Black and Asian unity, but I digress. Let me get back. So yes, there are some racist Asians who align themselves with white supremacy. I heard from a progressive Asian comrade of mine that many of the more progressive Asians have a term for the sellout Asians called banana. I don't know if that's a common thing or just this thing this one Asian comrade told me, where they are yellow on the outside, but white on the inside. And I told my Asian comrade, that's interesting because we call our traders Oreos, black on the outside and white on the inside. So yes, there have been many Asians who align themselves with white supremacy. But let me continue the article. And here's what I write. Those Asians who align themselves with white supremacy, they're obviously not most or even a large percentage of Asians. Most, I would argue, are like Christine Fan, that's Phan. Christine Fan is a research analyst with the Asian American Disinformation Table, which, as his website points out, is a national data source that coordinates research, strategies, policy recommendations, and corporate accountability around issues of domestic and transnational information impacting Asian Americans. That sounds like a mouthful. Let me do what Brother Malcolm taught me. He said, Mike, when you're talking to people about intellectual stuff, scholarly stuff, esoteric or confusing stuff, as Brother Malcolm would say, make it plain. So let me listen to Brother Malcolm, who, by the way, was a good friend of an Asian sister that they call Sister Yuri. Let me listen to Malcolm and make it plain. Here's what Christine Fan, that research analyst with a group called Asian American Disinformation Table, what they do is make sure that people know that there's a lot of disinformation out there and they weed through it to tell you what's real and what's fake. In Fan's progressive words, quote, "It is understanding that because of the way white supremacy has shaped all of our experiences, standing in solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities is fundamentally necessary to our work and our movement." That says it all. That says it all. That brings me back, as I write here in the article, that brings me back to Malcolm X's Asian comrade, Sister Yuri, who, as I pointed out, was so tight with Black revolutionaries that Malcolm and firebrand poet Amiri Baraka and revolutionary Angela Davis, they knew Yuri. They didn't call her by her full name. They called her Sister Yuri because she was part of the fight. You know, I hope people are listening closely to what I'm saying. You don't have to be like this, you know, eye to eye, 1-to-1 with Asians. You don't have to be eye to eye and 1-to-1 with anybody. But what you do have to do is find out who your real enemy is. And even if you don't feel that tight with our Asian brothers and sisters, although you should, just like with our brown brothers and sisters and our white brothers and sisters, and certainly our red brothers and sisters. But I'm saying you don't have to be tight with any of that. But what you do have to do is realize who the enemy is. I would encourage you to make Asians and so-called Indians, Native Americans, and our Latino brothers and sisters. I'm encouraging you to embrace them. But if you don't want to embrace them, that's okay. But God damn it, don't embrace the oppressor who's been oppressing you for so long. Look at what white supremacy has done to us since August 25, 1619 in the Virginia colony. Look at what white supremacy has done to us regarding slavery and sharecropping and convict leasing and Jim Crow and gerrymandering and redlining and mass incarceration and police brutality. That's what white supremacy has done to us since 1619. So even if you don't want to embrace our Asian brothers and sisters, our so-called Native American brothers and sisters, our Latino brothers and sisters, I would encourage you to embrace them, but it's not so much about who you embrace, it's about who you push away, who you resist, who you fight. And you gotta fight white supremacy because that's the source of all the evil. To the extent we have a beef, if we do, with our Asian brothers and sisters, our Latino brothers and sisters, our so-called Indian brothers and sisters, that's because white supremacy caused that. It's a divide and conquer. You all probably heard about the Berlin Conference. That's from 1885, where European powers came into Africa, their continent, and chopped it up. And that's where we got about 55 different countries in that single continent. And instead of those 55 separate countries that came together because the Berlin Conference and white people carved up and sliced up Africa in order to give it to certain European powers, instead of those 55 African countries coming together to fight white supremacy, they fight each other about land and about borders and about minerals. Instead of fighting the enemy that created the animus between the groups ought to come together and realize who their real enemy is. I remember when Malcolm was interviewed once, the news correspondent put the microphone in Malcolm's face and said, "Why aren't you going to Vietnam? Why aren't you fighting for the country?" Malcolm said, "America better not give him a gun, because if they do, he knows who to point it at." Now, again, I'm not advocating violence. I'm just talking about the point that Malcolm was making in regard to the real enemy. So I'm encouraging folks to do a couple things before I spend the last couple minutes talking about my beloved but misguided brother, Dr. Cornel West. Let me advise you all to do this. Find out more about what I'm talking about. Challenge what I'm talking about. See if what I'm saying is true by one, going to the article, Philadelphia Tribune, go to phillytrib.com, type in CORD, C-O-A-R-D, and type in 76 please. But don't stop there. Also, there's a group that has done extensive research on all this stuff. Two groups, in fact. Write this down. Log on to noarenaphl.org. That's noarenaphl.org. All the information is there. noarenaphl.org. And there's another group just as impressive. Go to their website. That's API-Pennsylvania.org. I tell you, our producer engineer, Roland, is so thorough. He got it right there on the screen, noarenaphl.org. And the second one is API-Pennsylvania.org. API-Pennsylvania.org. And both of those organizations will provide you with all the information you need to understand why you, and I'm talking primarily to Black people. I'm not talking exclusively to Black people. I'm talking primarily to Black people because you are being misled. You're being misled by our Black political leaders. You're being misled by our Black ministers. Because it's got to be about the masses coming together. It's got to be about resisting white supremacy. It's got to be about this multicultural army that comes together in the name of community, in the name of society, and dare I say in the name of socialism, to resist the oppression from the billionaire class. As I said pretty graphically early on, I don't know why these Black laborers and Black ministers are so enamored with these white billionaires, because if these Black ministers and these Black labor leaders were on fire, these billionaire real estate developers and CEOs wouldn't even piss on them to put the fire out. Again, noarenaphl.org and apipennsylvania.org. Let me wrap up the article by referencing the last paragraph or so. Here's what I wrote. In the meantime, I ask that African Americans in Philly repeat that. In the meantime, I ask that African Americans in Philly and Asian Americans in Philly come together like Malcolm and Sister Uri came together in Brooklyn. And in the same way they together oppose race/class exploitation there, we together must oppose race/class exploitation here. That's critically important. And I see I have approximately 6-7 minutes left, so let me jump to my half. Remember the beginning of the show, I said I have 1.5 topics. The one is what we just covered, 76th place, and the need for African Americans and Asian Americans to come together. And the half, because I don't have much time, is talk about the upcoming election. First of all, I want people to know that Sister Kamala Harris, Sister Madam Vice President Kamala Harris. I know she's not Angela Davis. I know she's not Assata Shakur. I know that. I know she's not revolutionary. But either she, as a Democratic candidate, or Orange Hitler / Mango Mussolini, one of them is going to be president. Whether you love it or not, one of them is going to be president. And even though Sister Madam Vice President Kamala Harris is not Angela Davis, not Assata Shakur, not revolutionary, she's head and shoulders better than what could happen if that other guy wins. If Madam Vice President Kamala Harris wins and people like me organize and protest about much of the stuff that she's done or will do, we can continue to protest and demonstrate and petition our government as the First Amendment allows us to. But if Orange Hitler / Mango Mussolini, if he wins, protesting will be outlawed. And instead of me sitting here at this TV show, or me sitting there at my radio show, or me writing my Tribune column and writing against, resisting Orange Hitler / Mango Mussolini, instead of me being able to do that, I'd be in a labor camp, a work camp, a federal detention center, because he would do what dictators throughout this planet have been doing most recently. He already said he'd, quote, be a dictator from day one. So if Madam Vice President wins, and we don't like the stuff she does as president, we can still exercise our right to protest. But if that guy wins, protesting will be outlawed. How do we know that? Read Project 2025. Read about how he will completely immunize the police. So if the police kill somebody from brutality, so be it. You get a pass, keep it moving. I say all that to say this. Third-party voting, and right now I'm talking to my revolutionary comrades. I'm talking about my socialist brothers and sisters, even my communist brothers and sisters. I'm talking about my progressive brothers and sisters, my leftist brothers and sisters. I know you don't like what the Biden administration, along with Vice President Kamala Harris, is doing. I know you, especially when it comes now to what's happening to our Palestinian brothers and sisters and babies. I know you don't. I know you see, like I see, Biden in bed with the Zionist apartheid government. I see that. But did you know that Benjamin Netanyahu wants Trump to win? Let me repeat that. Benjamin Netanyahu has already made it clear he wants Trump to win. Why do you think that is? Why do you think he wants Trump to win and doesn't want Madam Vice President Kamala Harris to win? Because he knows what a thug and what a monster and what an unrelenting racist Trump is. The reason that Angela Davis, I'd argue the greatest living revolutionary in modern day America, the reason why she supported and endorsed Joe Biden was not because Biden is a revolutionary, far from it. She saw the alternative. She saw that if Biden loses, that means Trump wins, and we won't get shit in this country. We won't even be able to raise hell in this country. So somebody as woke and as revolutionary and as socialistic and as progressive as Angela Davis is, and I love to call myself a revolutionary, but I couldn't even stand in the same space of Angela Davis. I know the hell she went through fighting against white supremacy and classism. So that sister knows what she's talking about. And if she realizes that you have to be pragmatic as if you're playing chess and not be emotional as if you're playing checkers, and go into that booth and hold your nose and vote for the candidate who allows some movement forward instead of locking your ass up when you decide to protest. And in my final minute or two, that brings me to my beloved brother, Cornel West. I'm not even going to mention Jill Stein because I don't want to start really cursing and yelling and screaming. I consider her a massive fraud and a traitor, but I'll spend time later expressing more of my opinion about her. But right now, here's the facts. Dr. Cornel West, arguably the greatest scholar / academic alive today, one of the greatest thinkers, intellectuals, all that. But I think because he's so great in that level, he thinks he's great in politics. It almost reminds me of Michael Jordan. You know, Michael Jordan played professional baseball. He was trash in baseball. But in basketball, he's arguably the greatest who ever touched the round ball. But because he was so great there, Michael Jordan, he thought he could also be great in baseball, but he couldn't. Because Dr. Cornel West is so great as an academic, a scholar professor, he thinks that he's great in moving progressives forward. He will not. And here's why. And this is critically important. Cornel West is currently on many swing state ballots, on many battleground ballots. Why is that important? That's important because he's likely to get 1 to 2% of the vote in those swing states. The polls now show Madam Vice President Kamala Harris and Orange Hitler tied in the polls at about 48%. So if Dr. Cornel West gets that 2%, that 1%, he moves Harris down to 46%. With Trump at 48 or 49. Do the math. Guess who wins? The same thing that Ralph Nader did in the 90s to help George Bush beat Al Gore is what Dr. Cornel West is about to do. He's not doing it intentionally. He is well-intentioned. He's a good man. But as I said at the outset, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. What Dr. West ought to do is to mobilize a strong leftist group, a strong progressive group, a strong revolutionary group, back Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, and then give her hell when she becomes president to make sure she does what she's supposed to do. I got much more to share, but we've run out of time. I encourage folks to check out my weekly radio show on WRD. It's called The Radio Courtroom every Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. Thank you, Roland. Called Radio Courtroom. This is TV Courtroom. That's Radio Courtroom. WURD 96.1 FM. And having run out of time, let me do this. Let me end this show the way I end every show. It goes like this. Think black. I'm out.